Hey, my name is Dean Rowan. I'm 32 years old, and for the last 10 years, I have been the night shift janitor at Helios Group, the tall glass tower that dominates the center of the city. Every evening after the last office lights begin to flicker out, I push my cart down the polished corridors on the upper floors, emptying bins, wiping glass partitions, mopping conference rooms that still smell of expensive coffee and quiet ambition. Most people who work here never learn my name. They see the gray uniform in the cart and they look past me, the way you look past a shadow on the wall. I prefer it that way. 10 years ago, I was not this man. I was a pianist in a military orchestra. I wore a dress uniform instead of coveralls and stood under stage lights while people applauded. The only person whose applause ever mattered to me was Emily. She always sat in the front row, hands folded in her lap, smiling as though every piece I played had been written for her alone. After the concert, she would rest her hand on my shoulder and say, "When you play, Dean, the whole world goes quiet." I believed her. Then one night, a drunk driver ran a red light and our car was hit broadside. I survived. Emily did not. After the funeral, I stopped touching the piano. The sight of the keys brought back the weight of her hand on my shoulder and the sound of her voice, and I could not bear it. I sold the instrument, left the orchestra, and took whatever work required the least amount of explanation. Cleaning offices at night suited me. No one asked questions. No one expected me to speak. I could disappear into the low hum of vacuum cleaners and the sharp smell of floor cleaner. That evening, I was working the 20th floor. It was a little after 9. Most of the executive offices were dark, though a few scattered lights still burned farther down the corridor. I had just finished mopping the hallway outside the small music room the building's owner had installed for private events when I heard the piano. At first I thought I was imagining it. The sound was hesitant, broken. A few notes of Claire de Lune played with more determination than skill. Someone was trying to find the melody by ear and failing where the phrases should connect. I set the mop handle against the wall and listened. Another wrong note, then another. Then a small, tired sigh. I should have kept walking. The rules were clear. Janitors did not enter function rooms after hours unless there was a spill or a mess to clean. I had spent a decade learning to stay invisible, and invisible people do not open doors they have no business opening. But the sigh came again, and this time it sounded like the beginning of tears. I pushed the door open a few inches. A girl of about 9 sat at the grand piano. She wore a pale blue dress, and her dark hair was pulled back neatly. Her eyes were open, but they did not move toward the sound of the door or toward the keys beneath her fingers. She was blind. I understood that at once. Yet her hands kept searching the keyboard with a kind of stubborn patience, as though the music existed somewhere inside her, and she only needed to pull it out into the air. I stood without moving for a long time. She struck the same wrong note 3 times in a row, then laid both hands flat on the keys and bowed her head. I stepped inside before I could talk myself out of it. "You're almost there," I said, keeping my voice low. She lifted her head sharply, turning toward the sound of my voice. "Who's there?" I stayed where I was, several paces from the piano. "My name is Dean. I work here." "Are you the security guard?" "No, I'm the janitor." She tilted her head a little, listening to something beyond my words. "You know this song?" I looked at the piano. 10 years. 10 years since I had touched keys that were not part of a vacuum or a trash compactor. My hands remembered anyway. My chest remembered. I used to play. Am I playing it wrong? I walked closer slowly. "Not wrong. You're playing the notes like separate stones. This piece needs to move like water." She was quiet for a moment. "Can you show me?" I glanced down at my own hands, rough from chemicals and heavy work, then at the polished black instrument that probably cost more than I made in a year. I did not belong in this room. I had told myself that for a decade. But the girl was waiting, face turned toward me even though she could not see me, and the hope in her expression was so plain it made my throat tighten. I sat at the second piano, the smaller one near the window. "What's your name?" "Bella." "That's a beautiful name, Bella." I placed my fingers on the keys. The first contact sent a shock through me so strong I almost pulled away. For an instant, I saw Emily in the front row, smiling. Then I heard Bella breathing beside me, waiting. I took a slow breath and played the section she had been struggling with. This time the phrases connected. The music flowed instead of stumbling. In the quiet room, I could hear the soft intake of her breath when the melody opened. When I stopped, she whispered, "It sounds like the ocean." I smiled without meaning to. It had been a long time since I had smiled at anything. Music isn't only sound, I said. It's feeling. It's color. It's what you sense even when you can't see. Her fingers found the thin silver bracelet on her wrist. She traced the tiny engraved words I could just make out in the low light. "Here, with your heart." "That's a nice bracelet," I said. "My dad gave it to me before he left." I did not ask more. Some sadnesses do not need questions to be understood. I knew what it was to carry a small object that proved someone had once been there. She turned her face toward me again. "Dean, will you teach me?" I meant to say no. I meant to explain that I was only the janitor, that I had no business teaching anyone anything, that rules existed for reasons. But her expression stayed open and steady, full of a trust I had not earned and did not deserve. In the end, I answered, "Yes, I can teach you." I did not know then that the life I had kept silent for 10 years had just begun to answer back. From that night on, the 20th floor became the place I both dreaded and looked forward to most. I started finishing my work a little earlier each evening. I mopped the corridors, emptied the bins, checked the conference rooms, and by 9 o'clock, when the floor had grown quiet and only a few distant office lights remained, I would walk to the music room. Bella was almost always already there. She sat at the grand piano with her legs swinging beneath the bench, hands resting on the keys as though she were waiting for a friend to return. She never needed to see me to know I had arrived. The moment she heard my footsteps, she smiled. "Dean's here." The first time she said my name like that, I didn't know how to answer. It had been a long time since anyone had waited for me with that kind of simple happiness in their voice. It had been a long time since my presence had meant anything to another person. I sat down beside her on the second piano bench. "What do you want to work on today?" "The part from yesterday, the one that sounds like rain." I laughed under my breath. "All right, but before it rains, your right hand needs to be softer." I taught her the way I had learned to feel music again myself. Not through notes on a page, but through sound and breath and images she could hold in her mind. I told her the low notes were like heavy footsteps on wooden floors, the high ones like water drops falling into a glass, the gentle transitions like someone turning to look back one last time before walking away. She learned quickly. She had an extraordinary ear. If I played a short phrase twice, she could already imitate it with surprising accuracy. But what mattered more was that she had a sensitive heart. She did not play to impress. She played as though she were asking the world whether it could hear her. One evening she stumbled over a difficult passage in a simple Chopin piece. She kept missing the same notes until she grew frustrated and struck the keys with the flat of her hand. "I can't do it." "Don't aim for perfect," I said, "but I keep getting it wrong." Wrong can be fixed, but first you have to know what the music is making you feel. She was quiet, head tilted slightly. "It's sad, but not the kind of sad that makes you cry. It's the kind that still has hope in it." I nodded. "Then play it that way. Let your heart lead. Your fingers will follow." She tried again. This time the notes were softer, more alive. Not perfect, but true. "Better," I told her. "Much better." Her face lit up as though I had given her something precious. Between the pieces, she asked me questions. "Dean, what does sunset sound like?" I thought for a moment. Sunset sounds like everything slowing down, like a long day finally letting out its breath. If you listen carefully, you can feel the sky changing color. She lowered her head. "I wish I could see colors." I looked at her, and something in my chest pulled tight. "You do see them, Bella, just in a different way. You hear colors, you feel them. Some people have eyes and never really see anything at all." She sat still for a while. Then, without warning, she reached over and hugged me. I went rigid. Since Emily died, I had kept almost everyone at a distance. I lived alone, ate alone, worked alone. Hugs belonged to a life that had already ended. But Bella held on with a clear, uncomplicated trust that made it impossible to push her away. "Thank you for being my friend," she whispered. I rested my hand lightly on her back. Always. I knew I was crossing lines. But every evening when I saw her sitting alone in the big room at 9 o'clock, waiting while her mother worked late, I could not bring myself to walk past. She told me her mother's name was Clara Voss, the CEO of Helios Group. A sharp, well-known woman who appeared in business magazines wearing white suits and an expression that never showed fatigue. I had seen her a few times in the lobby, surrounded by assistants and security, eyes fixed on her phone. I did not blame her. People in that position had to sacrifice. Still, watching Bella wait night after night, I wondered whether one of the things her mother had sacrificed was her daughter's childhood. Our secret did not last. One evening, the security guard on patrol came earlier than usual. He heard the piano, opened the door, and found me sitting beside Bella. "What's going on in here?" I stood up quickly. I was just helping her practice. He looked at my uniform, then at Bella. "You're the janitor. You don't have any business being in this room after hours." Bella spoke up fast. "No, Dean is my teacher. He didn't do anything wrong." The guard was already reaching for his radio. "I have to report this." The next morning, I was called into the management office. Richard Miller sat behind his desk, tall and thin, with cold eyes that always made the people beneath him feel as though they were dirtying the air simply by existing. He looked at me the way someone looks at a stain on the carpet. "You were found in the music room after hours alone with a child. Do you understand how serious this is?" I kept my voice steady. "I was teaching her piano. She was there by herself. She wanted to learn." Richard gave a thin smile. "You're paid to mop floors, not to play piano, and not to interact with the families of senior management." "But she needed help." "That is not your concern." The words made heat rise in my face. Still, I needed the job. I needed the rent money. I needed the small, quiet life I had built, even if it was only a shadow of a life. Richard leaned forward. "This is your final warning. If you go near that room again, you're finished. Understood?" I clenched my hands at my sides. "I understand." I turned to leave, but he added one more thing. "People like you should remember their place. You're a janitor, that's all." I stopped for a second, then walked out. I had heard versions of that sentence many times over the last 10 years. This time, it hurt more. Not because he had insulted me, but because he had said out loud the thing I had used to imprison myself. I was only the janitor, only a shadow, only a man who had already lost his music. That night, I did not go up to the 20th floor. I finished my shift and went straight home. But the following evening, just after 9, as I passed the corridor on the 20th floor, I heard the piano again. It sounded more broken than before, sadder. Between the halting notes, I heard Bella's voice calling softly. "Dean, are you there?" I stood outside the door, my chest tight. I should have kept walking, but I had made a promise. I opened the door. Bella sat at the piano, tears running down her face. "I thought you left me, like my dad did." I knelt in front of her. "I'm not leaving you, Bella." "But Mr. Richard said you're not allowed to come back." "Let me worry about that. Right now, let's just play." That night we played as though it might be the last time. And it was. When the piece ended, the door opened. Richard stood there with 2 other staff members and a security guard looking satisfied, as though he had finally caught someone in the act. "I warned you." I stood up. I already knew it was over. Richard spoke. "Collect your things. You're fired." Bella grabbed my hand and held on tightly. "Don't make him go. He's the only one who really sees me." For a moment, the whole room went still. But Richard's face did not soften. No negotiation. I knelt in front of Bella and tried to keep my voice steady. "Do you remember what I taught you?" She was crying. "Be here with your heart." "That's right. Keep playing like that." I pressed a small folded piece of paper into her hand. My phone number was written on it. If you ever need me, ask someone to call this number. Then I walked out of Helios Group. Bella remained alone at the piano. For the first time since I had met her, the music room was silent. 3 days after I was fired, I started stacking shelves at a small grocery store on the night shift. The pay was lower, the hours longer, and my back ached more by morning, but at least no one asked why a former pianist was now arranging boxes of cereal until after midnight. I kept telling myself this was better. I had walked away from the trouble. Bella was only a girl I had met by chance. Clara Voss was the CEO of a major company. She would find her daughter a proper teacher, someone clean and professional and acceptable in the eyes of people like Richard Miller. I almost believed it, but I could not stop thinking about Bella. I wondered whether she was still sitting at the piano in the evenings, whether she remembered to let the phrases breathe instead of forcing the notes, whether she still touched the silver bracelet and heard the words inside her head. I checked my phone every night and felt both relieved and hollow when there were no missed calls. On the 20th floor of Helios Group, Clara Voss was beginning to notice that something had changed. She was the kind of woman the entire building stepped aside for. 33 years old, sharp, decisive, the one who had taken a small tech company and turned it into the tower that now carried her name. She was used to giving orders, signing contracts, and silencing older men in boardrooms with a single look. She was also used to telling herself the same quiet lie that many successful people repeat, that the time she was missing with her daughter was only temporary, that after this quarter, after this deal, after this meeting, she would make it up to her. The meetings never ended, the calls never stopped, and Bella kept growing up in waiting rooms. One evening, Clara finished a long call with investors after 9 o'clock. She rubbed her temples, exhausted, and remembered that Bella was still in the music room. Normally, she would have texted an assistant to bring her daughter home. That night, for reasons she could not explain even to herself, she went down herself. As she approached the music room, she heard the piano. Bella was playing alone. But the sound was no longer hesitant or broken. It was soft, full of feeling, with real pauses and real emotion. Clara stopped in the hallway, surprised. She had never heard her daughter play like this before. Bella was not simply hitting the right notes. She was telling a story. Clara pushed the door open quietly, but Bella still knew it was her. "Mommy?" Clara paused, caught off guard. "How did you know it was me?" "I can hear your high heels. You always walk fast, even when you're tired." Clara smiled, though something in her chest tightened. Her daughter recognized the sound of her footsteps more clearly than she recognized the sound of her mother's voice. She walked over to the piano. "You played beautifully. Who taught you?" Bella's face brightened. "Dean." "Dean? Who?" "The janitor. He used to come every night. He said music isn't about seeing the notes, it's about feeling them. He said I could see colors with my ears." Clara was silent for a moment. "Why doesn't he teach you anymore?" The brightness in Bella's face faded. "Mr. Richard fired him. He said Dean was only a janitor and wasn't allowed to be here. He got in trouble because of me." Clara's expression turned cold. "Richard did what?" Before Bella could answer, Clara's phone rang. A call she could not ignore. She stepped out into the hallway out of habit, the same way she always did when work interrupted anything else. The conversation lasted nearly 20 minutes. She spoke about profit margins, strategy, growth targets, and commitments to the board. The entire time, Bella's words kept echoing in her head. He was the only one who really saw me. When she finally ended the call and turned back toward the music room, she heard something new. Not one piano. 2. Clara walked slowly down the corridor. The door was slightly ajar. Through the narrow opening, she saw a man in an old jacket sitting at the second piano. He no longer wore the janitor uniform, but she recognized the line of his back. It was Dean. Bella had called the number he left her. "I knew going back was wrong. I knew I could be accused of trespassing." But her voice on the phone had been so small. "Dean, I forgot how to play." I could not stay away. I sat with her and helped her find the music again. When she smiled for the first time in days, something inside me loosened. We played River Flows and You together on the 2 pianos. I led at first, then gradually let her take the melody while I followed. The sound filled the empty room like light moving through cracks. I did not know Clara Voss was standing outside the door, crying. When the piece ended, Bella clapped softly. "That was perfect, Dean." I smiled. "No, you were perfect. I was only following you." The door opened. I turned and saw Clara Voss standing there in a white suit. Her face was composed, but her eyes were red. I stood up at once. "I'm sorry, I know I'm not supposed to be here. Bella called me. I only wanted to—" Clara cut me off. "Who are you?" "Dean Rowan. I used to work here as a janitor." "And you were fired for teaching my daughter piano?" I hesitated for a second. "Yes." At that moment, Richard appeared in the hallway, clearly summoned by security. He walked in with the confident stride of someone who believed he was still in control. "Ms. Voss, I can explain. This man violated company policy—" Clara turned to him. "You fired the man who was teaching my daughter to play the piano." Richard faltered. "I didn't know the girl was your daughter." Clara's voice was ice. "That makes it worse, not better." Richard's face lost its color. Clara stepped closer to him. "You judged a man by his uniform instead of his character. You saw a janitor and decided he could have no value beyond mopping floors. You removed the only person who had made my daughter smile in months, and you didn't even think it was necessary to tell me." Richard had no answer. Bella walked forward slowly, one hand reaching for her mother, the other reaching for mine. Clara took her daughter's hand. I hesitated, but Bella pulled me closer until our fingers touched. She spoke quietly. "Mommy, Dean taught me how to hear your face in music. He said every person has a sound. You sound like strength and sadness and love." Clara's eyes filled with tears. She knelt in front of Bella and held her daughter's face in both hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I've been so busy looking at my work that I stopped looking at you." Bella wrapped her arms around her mother's neck. "It's okay, you're here now." Clara stood up and looked at me. "Thank you." I shook my head. "Bella is special. I only showed her something that was already inside her." Clara studied me for a long moment. "Don't leave yet." Then she turned back to Richard. "Be in my office first thing tomorrow morning. For now, get out of my sight." Richard walked away without another word, his face dark with humiliation. I remained standing in the music room between a CEO in a white suit and a blind 9-year-old girl, next to the piano I had believed I would never play again. I had no idea what would happen next, but for the first time in 10 years, the music inside me did not feel completely dead. It only needed someone to call it back to life. The next morning, Clara Voss called every employee in the building down to the main lobby. Managers, assistants, security guards, engineers, office staff, and the entire cleaning crew stood beneath the high glass ceiling of Helios Group, confused and uneasy. Clara stood on the raised platform at the front, dressed in a black suit, hair pulled back tightly. Her face was calm, but her eyes made the entire hall fall silent. I stood off to the side, uncomfortable in the suit someone had brought me. I was not used to being looked at. For years I had survived by staying out of sight. Now, hundreds of people were about to look straight at me. Clara began. 3 days ago, a man was fired from this company. His name is Dean Rowan. He worked as the night shift janitor. A ripple of whispers moved through the crowd. Some people turned to look at me. A few had seen security escort me out. Clara waited for the sound to settle. He was fired because he entered the music room after hours. Because he taught a blind child how to play the piano. That child is my daughter. The whispers grew louder. Clara's voice became clearer. Dean did not know Bella was my daughter. He did not teach her for money or for favor or for any hope of reward. He saw a lonely child, heard her struggling at the piano, and chose to sit down beside her. I lowered my head. Hearing someone describe me like that felt more exposing than any applause I had ever received on stage. Clara looked across the room. This company forgot something important. A person's worth is not measured by their job title. A high salary does not make anyone kinder. A janitor's uniform does not make anyone less valuable. Sometimes the most important person in this building is not the one sitting in the corner office, but the one who has the heart to notice a child who has been forgotten. The lobby was completely still. Clara turned toward me. Dean, would you come up here, please? I walked onto the platform. Each step felt heavier than the last, like walking across a stage without any music to hide behind. Clara continued. Dean Rowan lost his job for doing the right thing. Because of that, this company owes him more than an apology. She faced the crowd again. From today onward, Dean Rowan will be the music director of the Helios Foundation. He will lead a new program that provides free music education to children with disabilities, children who are visually impaired, and any child who has never had the chance to learn an instrument. I looked up sharply. Ms. Voss? She met my eyes. You are not just anything, Dean. You are the person my daughter needed. And you are the person this program needs. I had no words. In my mind, I saw myself pushing a cleaning cart down a dark hallway, and I saw Emily sitting in the front row all those years ago, smiling while I played. I wondered what she would say if she were still alive. I already knew the answer. She would say, Dean, you finally came back. Clara asked, will you accept? I looked down at my own hands. These hands had once played on stages. These hands had mopped floors. These hands had trembled the first time they touched piano keys again. These hands had held Bella's so she would not feel alone. I accept, I said. Applause broke out. At first it was scattered, then it grew. The cleaning crew at the back clapped the hardest. A few people wiped their eyes. I think it was not only for me. It was the first time many of them had seen someone who wore the same uniform as them called by name in front of the entire company. Then Clara asked Richard Miller to step forward. Richard came out of the crowd. His face had already lost its usual confidence. Clara spoke so everyone could hear. You judged a man by his uniform. You fired him without investigating, without asking me, without caring about my daughter. You let your prejudice replace your judgment. Richard opened his mouth. Miss Voss, I was only following policy. Clara raised her hand. Policy is not an excuse for indifference. From today, you are removed from your management position. You will work in the facilities team for 6 months under the supervision of someone new. I hope that standing in the place you once looked down on will teach you how to respect people. The crowd murmured. Richard bowed his head and said nothing more. Then Bella was led onto the platform by an assistant. She walked slowly, one hand feeling the air in front of her. I immediately knelt so I was at her level. She took the silver bracelet from her wrist. Dean, this is for you. I froze. No, Bella, your father gave that to you. She shook her head. You taught me what it really means. Here with your heart. You keep it. I'll always remember. She reached for my wrist and slipped the bracelet on. It was far too small for my hand, but it stayed there, catching the light from above. The entire lobby went quiet. Then the applause returned, deeper and more emotional this time. Clara looked at her daughter, then at me. For the first time, I saw her without the sharp mask she wore as CEO. In front of me was simply a mother learning how to return to her child, and a woman who understood that power meant nothing if it could not protect the people who mattered most. After the meeting, Clara took me to a small office in the Helios Foundation wing. On the desk were several folders already prepared, lists of schools and centers for children with disabilities, budget documents, program plans, and notes about hiring teachers. I stared at everything, still unable to believe it. When did you prepare all this? Clara gave a small shrug. From 3 o'clock this morning, I couldn't sleep. I looked at her. Do you really think I can do this? I heard you play with my daughter. I saw what changed in Bella. I don't need any more proof. I touched the silver bracelet on my wrist. I haven't touched music for 10 years. Clara's voice softened. No, you were only silent for 10 years. The words stayed with me long after she left. That evening, I went back to my small apartment and pulled the old box out from under the bed. Inside were a few pieces of sheet music, a photograph of Emily from our last concert, and a pair of white gloves I used to wear on stage. I placed the silver bracelet beside her picture. I'm going to play again, I said quietly. For the first time in 10 years, touching music did not feel like a betrayal of her memory. It felt like I was finally bringing her with me. A year later, the music hall of the Helios Foundation was full. It was no longer the small room on the 20th floor. Clara had converted part of an older building into a proper arts center for children with disabilities. There were classrooms for piano, violin, and cello, a small recording studio, listening classes designed for visually impaired children, and a scholarship fund so families who could not afford lessons could still attend for free. I had become the music director in every real sense. I hired teachers, designed programs, and taught many of the children myself. Children who could not read sheet music, but could feel rhythm better than most sighted people. I met children who were deaf and felt music through vibrations in the floor. Children on the autism spectrum who only communicated through melody. Children who had been labeled difficult to teach simply because no one had ever tried to listen to them in the right way. Bella, now 10, was the center of our first public concert. She sat at the grand piano in the middle of the stage. On her wrist was a new silver bracelet Clara had given her, engraved with the words "Music is light." The old bracelet still rested on my own wrist, catching the stage lights whenever I raised my hand to conduct. The piece we performed that night was one I had written for her. Those things we cannot see. It began with a few scattered notes, the same hesitant sound I had first heard her play alone. Then the melody gradually grew fuller. Violins entered like thin threads of light, cellos like deep water. And Bella's piano carried everything forward through fear, loneliness, and finally hope. Before we went on stage, Bella found my hand backstage. "What if I make a mistake?" she asked. I knelt in front of her the way I had the night I was fired. "Do you remember what I taught you?" She smiled. "Be here with your heart." "That's right. If you play with your heart, no note is ever truly lost." She nodded. Clara stood nearby, her eyes already red. In the past year, she had changed in quiet but visible ways. She was still the sharp, formidable CEO who ran Helios with impressive precision. But she no longer left Bella waiting alone in empty rooms. She rearranged her schedule, learned to turn off her phone during dinner, and sometimes simply sat in the corner of the practice room without opening her laptop. Bella always knew when her mother was there. Sometimes that was enough. The concert began. I stepped onto the conductor's podium. Below, parents, journalists, Helios employees, and the children who had joined the program waited in silence. Clara sat in the front row. She had started to lift her phone to record, then lowered it again. She wanted to watch with her own eyes, really watch. I raised my hands, the music rose. Bella played the opening notes, light, uncertain, like a child reaching into the world for the first time. Then the orchestra joined layer by layer, building around her piano. Bella could not see the keys, could not see the audience, could not see the stage lights. But she felt everything. She listened to the breath of the orchestra, to the silences between phrases, and to her own heart more clearly than any written music could ever show her. I conducted with a tight throat. I thought of Emily. I thought of her hand resting on my shoulder after every performance. I thought of the years I had locked music away because I believed it had died with her. But that night, listening to Bella play, I understood that Emily had never been left behind. Love does not disappear when someone leaves. It only changes shape. For me, it had become the music I was now passing on to a girl who could not see light, but could make an entire hall believe in hope. The piece reached its highest point. Bella's piano shone at the center. Then everything softened and returned to the opening notes, no longer scattered, but calm and whole, like someone who had finally found their way home. The last note hung in the air. Silence. Then the entire hall rose to its feet and applauded. Bella stood up, slightly uncertain because she could not see the reaction. I walked over and took her hand. Together we bowed. The applause grew louder. In the front row, Clara was crying and smiling at the same time. I had never seen her look so light. After the concert, a reporter approached me. "Mr. Rowan, what inspired you to create this program?" I looked across the stage at Bella standing beside Clara, her hand resting in her mother's. Then I glanced at the silver bracelet on my own wrist. I was once lost, I answered. I thought my music had died with my wife. Then I met a little girl who reminded me that music doesn't belong to big stages or titles. It belongs to anyone who needs to be heard. The reporter asked one more question. What would you say to people who feel invisible? I thought for a moment. Sometimes the most important moments in life happen when no one is watching, when there is no reward, no promise, no recognition. Only one person who needs you, and you choose to stay. If you don't know what to do, start there. I looked down at the bracelet. Be here with your heart, the rest will follow. That night, after almost everyone had gone, I returned alone to the stage. The hall was empty, the chairs neatly arranged, the lights dimmed. I sat at the piano where Bella had played. Clara stood quietly at the aisle. She had not come up onto the stage. Bella was already asleep in the back room after an overwhelming day. I placed my hands on the keys and played the piece Emily had loved most. This time I did not have to stop because the pain was too great. I still remembered her. I still loved her. But the remembering no longer felt like a locked door. It felt like a room that now had light inside it. Clara walked closer and sat in the front row. When I finished, she spoke softly. Thank you, Dean. I turned toward her. For what? For seeing Bella. And maybe for helping me see her too. I looked at the stage, at the piano, at my own hands. Bella saved me as well. Clara did not ask what I had been saved from. She understood. A year earlier, I had been only a janitor who believed his life had ended the night Emily died. Bella had been only a blind girl playing wrong notes in an empty room. Clara had been a powerful CEO who was too busy to hear her own daughter's loneliness. Music had pulled the three of us together. A mother learning to see with her heart. A girl learning to turn darkness into melody. And a man who thought he had lost everything learning how to hope again. Our story did not begin on a grand stage. It began with a halting sound on the 20th floor at 9 o'clock in the evening, when a janitor who should have kept walking chose instead to stop in front of a door. I had asked, "Can I play with you?"